All right, I just started the recording. So welcome everyone. I'm Peter Smallage. I'm the New York State Extension Forester. I'd like to welcome you to the monthly installment of the Forest Connect webinar series. Today is a very special day, one that I've personally been looking forward to because we've brought together a group of talented people from a cloud of talented people, foresters who have built slash walls. So uh, Brett Chedzoy, who's going to be hosting today, and Jeff Ward, who was part of the presentation last month, and I were talking about, one of the ways to get more people kind of linked into the information base and the personal experience of building slash walls. And we thought, let's have a panel discussion. So that's what this is. This is a panel discussion. Brett's going to be leading it. I'm going to mute and disappear, but Brett, it's all yours. And I'd like to just thank all of the foresters and all of the participants for being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Peter failed to mention that in 20 plus years of him doing these monthly Forest Connect webinars, I don't believe we have ever tried to do a panel, more of a podcast conversation today about each of these foresters' individual experiences with building slash walls. So this is very unrehearsed, although I think that their stories will come through very, very well and clearly for us. What I'm going to do is just take a moment to introduce each of our four guest presenters today by name and title, and then we'll move into an overview of their projects where they can present themselves more fully. And I'm going to call on them in the order in which they were listed in the announcement for this webinar. So first, I'd like to introduce um, Ken, who's the Massachusetts Department of DCR Division of Water Supply, and Tim from Dwight and Lewis Lumber Company in Pennsylvania. We have Dan, who's a New York State DEC forester with lands and forests, and then Joshua, who is with the Connecticut Regional Water Authority. So they can fill in the blanks there, but let's move into what I'm calling the overview session. And Ken, you're up first. And each of
Great.
you can remember to unmute yourselves. Yep.
All right. Thanks, Brett. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me. Hello, everybody. My name's Ken Canfield. I work for Massachusetts Department of Conservation, Recreation, Division of Water Supply Protection. I'm the chief forester at the Quabbin and Ware River watersheds. So we supply high quality drinking water to 2.7 million residents in Massachusetts, about 40% of the state. And we own and manage about 100,000 acres of forest land that is basically the filter for that water. So our overall goals for that land is just to introduce diversity of vertical and age structure and species composition, because we think that'll be, the most resilient, resistant forest to disturbances, over time. And the big picture of my slash wall, it's drone photo of it there in the picture. It's in Ocam in the Ware River watershed. It was part of Jeff Ward's regional study he did in southern New England about the effectiveness of slash walls. So it's basically Jeff's fault. He asked us to do it. We did two 14-acre clear cuts. As you can see, there's some retention in there. And one of the 14 acres, one of the clear cuts has a slash wall around it, and it was built in 2021.
Thank you, Ken. And Peter and I had a chance to see Ken and Herm's slash wall several years back, and I think to this day you have the imaginary award for the most robust slash wall I've seen. I kind of remember something I thought I could almost drive a side by side down across the top. So you can get into some of the process of how that was made later.
That award,
Tim,
thank you.
you're up. Yeah. Tim, unmute yourself and give us an overview of yourself and your project, please.
Okay, thank you, Brett. Thank you, Peter, for having me today, and welcome everybody this afternoon. I'm Tim Fenstermacher. I'm a certified forester and forest manager with Dwight Lewis Lumber Company in northeastern Pennsylvania. Along with the owners of the company, who are also foresters, manage 15,000 acres of company lands that are FSC certified and about 5,000 acres that are not certified that the company owns. And we also manage several thousand acres of private woodlands that private woodland owners own. To date, we've done 3 slash walls. Two of them are on our own company property in Sullivan County, Pennsylvania. They were done in 2023, the winter of 2023, finished in the spring. Um, each one of those was 15 acres. So the one was 3,700 feet of slash wall, the other one about 38. We tried to keep both of them, the factors, the same so we could compare them, take the learnings from the first one, hopefully apply to the second one. They're not contiguous, but they are in very close proximity, which you'll be able to see on one of the slides later on. They are in black cherry forest type with predominantly beech in the understory, and they were scheduled for regeneration type harvesting. And I put one little plug in right here in the beginning. In 2024, the Keystone Wood Products Association, in a series of educational videos they did called Where in the Woods, they came out and they did a segment on the slash walls that we did on our company property. So if you search Keystone Wood Products Association, go to their YouTube channel and scroll down through their videos to the one titled Slash Wall. They did a very good professional airing of the slash wall with some really good drone footage, and it's only 7 or 8 minutes long. So the other slash wall we just completed was for a private client in central Pennsylvania in Lycoming County, the Outer Run Fish and Game Club. And that was a small prototype slash wall, only 5 acres in upland oak forest type. And they wanted to see if how it was going to work to maybe apply on a larger scale because they are a large forest owner. And that's the picture that's up now. The top left picture is one of the slash walls that we did in 2023 on our own property. And the one at the bottom is that was early in the construction on the Outer Run Fish and Game Club. And they were both constructed in a different fashion with different equipment that we'll get into a little bit later. So we've done about 20,000 linear feet of slash walls up to this point. 10 of it was completely designed and managed by us, and the other 10 was on DCNR Forest timber sale, where their forester did all the design work, and we just administered the slash wall on.
Thank you, Tim. I got so mesmerized looking at Tim's background there, which may win my award for best background in one of our webinars, that I forgot to advance the slide. All right, so next up is Dan. Dan, please introduce yourself, unmute, and give us an overview of your slash wall project.
Yeah, thank you for having me. So I work with the New York State DEC on, as what was mentioned earlier, state forest land management in Cattaraugus County, which is in the southern tier of western New York, about an hour and a half south of Buffalo or so. And this particular slash wall, I call it the Bush Hill slash wall. It was part of about a 122 acre timber sale, which was completed in 2022. The stand type was a northern hardwood, predominantly sugar maple. The other kind of key components there were basswood and black cherry. And so I think it was in the fall or so of 2022, I went out to Arnott and saw the presentation in person out there of the slash wall. and we came back to Cattaraugus County and worked on building a slash wall post cut. Okay, I think it's kind of important to mention that. And this was on 55 acres in the perimeter, which we had talked about as a group earlier, other perimeters and other acreages. This one was about 6,500 feet. Um, we used the term amoeba shaped earlier. This one is just like that. If not, there's a few jut outs that kind of become some of the difficult trying to curve or turn the wall and keep the soundness of the wall, the structure of it. So, and the point about doing this after the timber sale, again, there was no timber sale trade-off involved in it. It was through EPF, Environmental Protection Funds. And so we got those funds approved in the winter, if you will, of 22, and then the wall was being constructed in the spring of 23. And so there was a period of some browsing in this area before the wall was closed out. And that's something that's very interesting to make note of. You can see a couple of years of browsing, then the wall closes in, if you will, closed up, and then you have in some cases 5 or 6 feet of unbrowsed, quick straight grown seedlings. So that's a little background of the Bush Hill slash wall.
Dan, like other foresters that built slash walls, reached out to us at different stages in the kind of planning process here, and it was a lot of fun to do the email exchanges back and forth. But I think it was fortunate that he was able to come out to one of our annual field days into September too and see some actual slash walls. It helps have that visual in mind. Um, okay, Joshua, unmute yourself, please, and please introduce yourself in more detail and tell us about your project.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Joshua Tracy. I'm a forester at the South Central Connecticut Regional Water Authority. We're based out of New Haven, Connecticut. We manage land, about 28,000 acres that supports good, clean drinking water for somewhere around 400,000 consumers in New Haven County. We were a part of two slash wall constructions, one shown on the screen here. This is in Seymour, Connecticut. This one is about a 40-acre cut total, 20 acres of which is encased by the slash wall. It was predominantly a white pine stand. It had about 178,000 board feet of white pine. And then the rest of it, which added up to 344,000 board feet, was mixed hardwoods. And then we had a second slash wall that was built in Madison, Connecticut. That one was similar in size, about 20 acres inside the wall and 20 acres outside the wall. That one had about 256,000 board feet of mixed hardwoods. Both of these were built, or at least created by my predecessor, Alex Amendola, in conjunction with the Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station and Jeff Ward as part of Jeff and Peter's and Brett's study to see how slosh walls worked and whatnot. So I'm excited to go into further details on these in future categories.
Thank you, Joshua. And I'll add to that, one of my former employers, Frucci and Willicke, their office was in Madison, Connecticut, so I'm happy to see a slash wall in Madison. Peter and I got a chance to see that one a few years ago too during the New England SAF annual gathering. All right, so we're gonna thank you everybody for the overviews. We're gonna circle back now to Ken and then follow in the same order to get to our next question, which is I'll summarize it as what led you to build a slash wall. Give us some background on what led to that, triggering that decision.
Thanks, Brett. Yeah, so hopefully people can see that slide. As I mentioned, one of our goals with our forestry program is to regenerate a diverse species of trees. Most of the property that we manage is dominated by pine oak. And so we think, long term, given all the invasive insects and pathogens that get introduced, we keep losing species of trees. We want to be trying to grow as many different species as possible on our property. And so we're really interested in the regeneration we get back after our harvest. And we had noticed that we were really good at growing a few species, particularly in the Quabbin. The graphs you see are results of some regeneration surveys that we do, where we do 15 years post-harvest, and we go in and we measure the two tallest species on transects of plots. That's a Bill Leak, based off of a Bill Leak paper that he wrote years ago. It's a quick and dirty way to kind of look at the trajectory of a stand once this stems have had time to kind of exert winners and losers. And so we were finding, particularly in Quabbin, that we were really good at regenerating black birch and white pine and red maple. It was over 80% of our regeneration. And on the right-hand side, you can see the Ware River watershed, where oaks make up like 30% of the regeneration. And we have two big variables with that, and that one of them is browse. The Ware River watershed was always open to hunting, and it was heavily hunted. And Quabbin for a long time was not. We started controlled hunts and have expanded hunting in Quabbin. We started in 1991, but we still see this lag in regeneration. The graphs that you see are those surveys were done on harvests that were completed between 1995 and 2008. So some of these harvests were not that long after we started hunting in Quabbin, and we still see the lag. So we've been really interested in regeneration. The other big variable was in Ware River watershed, the silviculture was typically more aggressive, larger openings, and Quabbin was more irregular shelterwood, small opening type silviculture. So we've been wrestling with silviculture and regeneration for a long time. And when Jeff approached us about the study in the slash wall, it just seemed to be a great opportunity to help figure out kind of that relationship and have an experiment right on our own property. So that's basically what triggered us, was just the difficulty. The good news is we always get trees, but the browsers have a big effect on which trees are the winners in the end. So
we'll blame it on Jeff. All right, Tim, you're up next.
Yeah. Thank you, Brett. What got us interested in slash walls was, quite frankly, economics. In our part of Pennsylvania, we've had problems with regeneration due to deer browsing for several decades. And I guess in the late 80s, early 90s, the industry here started to look at things like electric fencing initially, and then woven wire fencing for regeneration. And we've actually successfully regenerated thousands of acres with woven wire fence over the last 20, 25 years on our properties. We're fortunate in Pennsylvania to have several fence contractors that have developed, that are specifically equipped to install deer fencing on large forest settings. Again, back in the early 90s, I think, is when that started. The problem that we found ourselves in is, over the last 4 or 5 years, the cost of fencing has dramatically increased. At the same time, the value of our forest products has plummeted, specifically cherry. So we were looking for viable economic alternatives, and slash wall was the one that really struck us and stuck out to us. So where it's possible, and it's not possible everywhere, but where it's possible, we believe that it's effective, is going to be effective, and it's certainly economically attractive as an alternative for us for regeneration. Um, and we're not going to specifically talk about costs today. At least I can't because of proprietary issues and antitrust things, but we can talk about some of the factors that influence cost, which there are many, and I think we'll get into them at least in a general sense here a little bit later.
Thank you, Tim. Dan,
Yeah,
and now
so
repeat the question. What triggered the decision to do this slash wall?
for us again, it was started with forest inventory and identifying that there are issues, concerns out there. I wasn't sure if this slide was gonna make this in here or not, but I kind of wanted to put a wanted sign on the deer on the one side. But obviously we can see the browse as you look at that picture of white ash that's still alive and kicking out here in Western New York. We can see that, but what about what we can't see? You know, we can quantify that as foresters, but what about what's the impacts that deer and overbrowsing is having on the entire ecosystem? But it was in 2014 when we started a unit management plan for Cattaraugus County that covered approximately 34,000 acres of state reforestation areas. And it was during that process that we put some methods in place, if you will, to specifically look for regeneration issues or concerns and then consider using deer exclusion as a tool. And so we mentioned fencing earlier, and we're having a conversation about slash walls. And really, I do actually have numbers, which may come up later, but you look at it was substantially less expensive to build the slash wall compared to fencing at the time. And but so again, that's to protect the overbrowsing of deer very specifically, and then it also came from working with on WMAs or wildlife management areas from a period of between 2010 and 2015, where we were implementing patch clear cuts and for early successional habitat specifically for grouse. And it was a pretty big patch of woods that some of the prescriptions called for pretty small cuts. And we were finding that depending on the size of that cut, you just weren't getting the regeneration. And as I think Ken mentioned, we're really good at regenerating black birch, beech, you know, maybe some red maple, striped maple, that kind of thing. You could guarantee that, but that's not what we're looking for. So really, it was working out in the field and then going back to the field to see how what you implemented and then what were the results and quantifying that and tracking it through inventory. So that's really what led us to want to be building our slash wall, if you will, and then also just the educational one, continuing our own education through going to these webinars or in-person visits and communicating with others in the industry and then wanting to share that with folks in the private sector, you know. So we're able to do that in our region out here with the construction of the slash wall. That's what I
Very good.
have.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Dan. Joshua?
Yeah, I mean, as with the other presenters here, Southern Connecticut has not been unscathed by deer. It's a pretty urban area. Southern Connecticut in general is fairly forested, but when you start going into Southern Connecticut into New Haven County as a whole, it's pretty urban, which pushes the deer into, our edges in our forests. So the idea that a slash wall can extirpate the deer. I mean, we only have three choices with deer, right? We have to kill them, find some way to stop them from procreating, or we can extirpate them from the site. And we've seen studies shown that even small enclosures that prevent deer from entering, promote native plant growth, and reduce the chances of invasive species from going out of control in those same areas. So what's more enticing than that and doing it on a much larger scale? The other thing that's really enticing about doing a slash wall, especially from our perspective as a not-for-profit organization, is that I don't have to go to our finance folks and say, hey, I need permission to pay a contractor to go out and put a fence in our forest. I can use the same exact contractor we have that bids on the job, the logger that's out there that's cutting the trees for us. They're already on site. They already have the equipment, and they can continue to build the wall for us without having to get a second contractor on site with different rules, different, legalese that you have to go through with the company. That's super enticing to just get it all done in one shot, and you typically have a pretty positive relationship with the person doing the job anyway, so you can have there's understanding there of what's expected. Sometimes you might get a fence contractor out in the woods, and they're like, what are you talking about? What is the point of this? You usually have some like-minded people doing this work. The genesis of our walls kind of stemmed from in Madison we have a long-term um, cutting regime site where Jeff Ward and Jeff Ward's predecessor had been looking at different cutting regimes on the site, looking at shelter woods, looking at um, looking at clear cuts with reserves, various cutting types, and we needed to get in there and do some commercial thinning and some commercial cutting in that area, and the area was far too small for us to get a contractor in. And we said, well, the rest of the site looks great for a slash wall. We might as well get a slash wall built here, and it's already kind of a site focused around research. So we'll establish one slash wall here, and while we're at it, we might as well do two. And the other site we chose was Seymour here, and since Seymour had a drastically different forest type being predominantly conifer, it was kind of a good yin and yang of the two sites to say, is there going to be any differences in regeneration or differences in construction or differences in any way building a predominantly conifer based wall versus a mixed hardwood wall. Um, so it was exciting to get to see the juxtaposition between those two types of harvests.
Thank you, Joshua. Okay, we're gonna circle back to Ken and start on our third question, which is describe or share with us the process that you went through to build a slash wall.
Thanks, Brett. Yeah, so because we're a state agency, we basically put all of our harvests through a proposal process, what we call the proposal process. So it goes through an internal review, and then it actually goes through a public review period. We're actually just coming towards the end of our public comment period for our fiscal year 26 projects. So this one went through that process. It was proposed, and the way it was proposed was kind of like, if we're allowed to do this, this is what we want to do. We need the commissioner of DCR to sign off on any opening that's bigger than 5 acres. So we needed specific approval to do this, and the fact that it was part of a regional study was able to help us justify that. So it worked out great. We also, because we're a state agency, all of our timber sales go out to bid. So we can't just say we've got the perfect logger for this project and call them up. We have to put this out to bid, and we have to accept the highest bid. So I had to set this up. The map is a little bit hard to see. You can see the two clear cuts kind of to the western side of that map. The site we chose it for a lot of different reasons. It's relatively flat ground. It had a good mix of species, oak and pine on it for building the wall. It was good access. It's close to our OCAM office, so we've had a lot of tours there for foresters. Really accessible site for monitoring and for doing tours. So There was a couple issues with it. There's power lines that run right in between the two clear cuts. The one to the southwest is the one with the wall around it, and that's right up against a boundary line. So we were kind of squeezed in between a property boundary and the power lines, which kind of limited the shape of the wall. In Massachusetts, we have a slash law, so that pertains to slash near boundary lines or near woods roads. So we had to figure that out with Service Forestry, the folks that regulate those laws. And I basically marked the whole thing, and we just kind of painted where we wanted the wall. It was pretty obvious along the power lines, but we painted around the edge. I marked some thinning outside of the wall on the western side for kind of added low grade material. And then we put it out to bid. We do our bids lump sum. So we used Jeff and Brett's numbers on their slash wall page. I don't know if those have been updated, but back in 2020, when we were putting this together, when we took into account the length of the wall, we estimated between $9,000 and $16,000 to be the cost. And so when we put our lots out to bid, we have a minimum bid, so we won't accept any bids under a certain amount. We took, $20,000 off of that minimum bid and put it out to bid. We ended up getting 3 bids, which was great. We really just told, in the contracts, told the loggers, we want a 10-foot tall wall that's 20 feet wide, and this is how long it's going to be. This is the amount of material we think it's going to take. So factor that into your bid. And, we didn't specify really how it was going to get built or what kind of equipment was going to get built. We ended up getting really lucky and getting a great crew that had the right equipment mix. They had a hot saw feller buncher to cut all the trees, and then they followed that with a cut to length processor to process it, and then they had 2 forwarders, and it was basically the perfect mix and a great crew. They were a young crew, really eager and excited about. They bought into the project. They thought it was really cool that it was the first slash wall in Massachusetts, and the 2 forwarder operators were kind of competing to see who could build better sections of the wall, which might explain its beefiness. So in the end, it ended up working out great. The loggers were happy. The person who won the bid was actually Allied Brothers Lumber, a mill in Vermont, and the mill was happy. They subcontracted it to the loggers. They were happy, and we were happy, and yeah, it worked out really well.
Thank you, Ken. So remember to bring that up again, the tips section where you want 2 young guys that are competing for bragging rights. And
Exactly.
Tim?
Thank you, Brett. Yeah, so this question is really difficult to answer in the time that we have today. We could have several 1-hour sessions just specifically on the process. That being said, the first thing I would say here is that we followed the guidelines that were detailed in the research from Brett and Peter in the publications as close as we could. Quite frankly, in my opinion, you guys didn't miss very much at all in those guidelines. Any deviation from those guidelines, in my opinion, will very likely have an impact in terms of the cost or the quality and effectiveness of the wall. And I say that from experience because there were a couple things that I deviated a little bit from those guidelines. I thought maybe I had a better way, and it turned out that it was doable, but it had an impact, specifically on cost. A couple of those things are like residual trees in the wall supply zone, acute angles, trying to avoid acute angles in the design, and sometimes based on the stand that you're working in or boundary lines or topography, you can't avoid those type of angles, but even if you can just round them off instead of coming to an acute angle, has a extreme bearing on your cost versus building a square uh, angle in those areas of your design. Same way with the residual trees. Some people think that in order to keep the silviculture the same, it's not good to have residual, or they want to have the same amount of residual trees uh, throughout the stand. But and you can do that, but if you do, just got to realize it's probably going to have an impact on cost with the operators having to work around those residual trees, and it can add up in a hurry. So I put together this a real simplified process here, and this would change depending on whether you're a consulting forester, an industrial forester perhaps, or if you are the landowner. So I'm thinking of this in general as a forester that you have complete control of the property on, and you really don't need to get outside approvals. So first, obviously, is determine the need for regeneration. That's pretty obvious. Second would be evaluate the material availability for a slash wall and the proximity to the wall. This one's pretty important and is a major impact on cost if you don't have enough material close enough to the wall. Identify a contractor or contractors to do the work, find out what their availability is, and share the information that you have with them as well as the landowner. And then the next thing would be to do the field work, which would be the design and layout, schedule the operations, and then execute and monitor. The walls that we did, the first two we did on our own property were with a hot saw feller buncher and a grapple skidder to bring material if needed. You want to try to avoid that if at all possible. Um, Bringing material with another machine, especially with a skidder, is going to increase your cost in a hurry. But that construction went very well. This more recent one we did was kind of unique in that we had the timber harvest was actually completed with a conventional crew. They did the harvesting, cut all the material, and then we had an independent contractor come in post-harvest and construct the wall with a 160 excavator with a thumb on it. And it worked very, very well. Was really happy with that wall. That was the Otter Run wall in central Lycoming County.
Want to respond to something that Tim led off with and about following all the exact guidelines, recommendations. The guide that keeps being referenced, which is on the slashwall.info site there, that was to share our learning curve up until about 2021, 2022. But today we're building on that collective learning curve, and I wouldn't want anybody to um, repeat the same old mistakes, but at the same time, I think we still are going to figure out a lot of creative new ways to build cost-effective and effective slash walls too, which is why we're doing this uh, panel group conversation today. So yeah, there's a maybe a fine line to walk there, but we shouldn't think that the book is written, so to speak, on slash walls. Thank you, Tim. We'll move on to Dan.
Yeah, so again, kind of similar to what Ken had mentioned, being a state agency, we do need to involve a lot of other uh, procedural kind of checkoffs where we needed to get some buy-in from central office as well as regional forestry direction. I mentioned this as a point toward the end, but I communicated quite a bit with our Division of Fish and Wildlife and Marine Resources, as well as the NGOs. And another important one is the local government. And in the lower left slide is a portion of the wall looking across kind of a valley toward a county road on the other side. And I say that in a way laughing a little bit, but it's visible, regardless of that road being over there, people are going to be on these properties. So Another is buy-in or conversation that needs to be had is just the public in general. And if nothing else, this is a calling card, a business card, and in the sign that's there, that we have a phone number for folks. And I think all of these things go a long way in helping initially get buy-in from the people that, in this case, that we're going to approve funding, to the people that we're trying to convince this is the right thing to do, and here's why. And so I think another one or two that's important is to some degree, the industry partners that we're working with, as well as the logging crews. And we're just kind of reiterating what has been said earlier. People took great pride in working on this project and building this wall, and I think other ones too. And I think when you win them over, you've won some fans and you've won some promoters that can try to do something like, similar like this on private property or other projects. This one's very similar to what Tim mentioned. Again, one of the first steps is just realizing that there's a need in a particular situation to either protect or try to protect the regeneration or exclude the deer in this case. Um, and then again, we basically went through all of the field work and preparation. We, like Ken mentioned, contractually, we needed to scope and build a contract that we could use to bid out this work that's being done on state land. We needed to identify where it was going to be, and as we learned at Arnott, painting certain heights on trees and to use as a guide. And then I had a 10-foot stick that we would go out and walk around the wall as they're building, and just we found ways to measure on the equipment and that kind of thing. And a note similar to what Ken mentioned is this project was done post sale, but with a grapple skidder and an excavator with a thumb. Um, so we've again we took with the crews that were available and in the bidding process, and we made the recommendations as best we could, and we tried, and it worked out pretty well. And so then there was a fair amount of dailies, on site, if not every single day, on site supervision. And and again, I continued to share information with the crews, including anything that I could get from Cornell and from Brett and Peter to encourage them to go home and look this stuff up or watch these videos and that kind of thing. And I think that really helped. Um, so I think that's pretty much it from what I was thinking in terms of the process. And then again, you had to do a fair amount of, to some degree, selling this, to initially convince people we want to try this, and then figure out, and again, that's going back to what others have said, all of the information that I got from Cornell gave us the confidence, and then the back and forth, like Brett mentioned, emailing, maps and GPS information, whatever we had to share, and it went a long way to making this possible for us.
Thank you, Dan. Joshua.
Yeah, and just to Dan's point, the buy-in from the public is pretty big. Both of our sites, uh, the Seymour one that's on the screen now, this one, if you look to the south, is bounded by Haddad Road and Silvermine Road, and this is a super popular road to be driving down. And so we tried to get buy-in from local government. When we initiated the sale, there was a change in government, and once the sale commenced, the new regime started freaking out about what was going on, and none of the internal government kind of communicated with each other, whether it was the Wetland Commission or whoever we had talked to. So we had to kind of calm that fire down a little bit. Whereas the other site in Madison is so far into the woods that I think maybe one house can see it from a hilltop, a mile away. And so there's very little concern from there. So you do have to figure out if you're going to be seen by the public, you may want to do some outreach. You may want to do some really good signage. And you may just want to prepare for the type of comments you're going to get about the condition of the site because it's not going to be something anyone's ever seen before. Uh, some people have seen clear cuts and they find them to be unappetizing. Throw a gigantic wall of slash in the mix and people are really turned off. So, education's needed. Uh, Prior to the sale would be best, but after the fact, people do tend to understand it. Um, the other thing I would mention in the planning of the wall is, you can see all the walls that have been built here are different shapes. They tend to follow as round as possible, but you're kind of constricted by the topography of the site. You're constricted by the boundaries of the site and that sort of thing. It's a good idea to, when you're thinking about building your slash wall, throw a topo map up of the site. Try to create as best a circle as you can within that area. You don't want your wall to go perpendicular to steep slopes. It makes it really challenging to construct walls on steep slopes. Or if you have any outcrops that the wall is going towards, that would create a right angle. Right angles are difficult to create and they use more material. So, um, it's good to plan ahead, but also, walk the route that you plan to build the wall ahead of time with flagging. Make sure it makes sense and then go out and do some permanent paint marks on the trees that, when you have the logger go out, you can say, these are the trees that are going to be included in the wall. This is where the wall should be constructed. At least you know ahead of time that it makes sense. Um, One of our sites used the logger took the better part of a year to construct the wall, and that's because he was a single individual using a skidder and a fellow buncher. Um, that became challenging over time because as he completed sections of the wall, the old section would start to sag as new sections were built. So we had to kind of sign off on different sections of walls as they were completed, so we knew they had met the standards at some point in the construction. Versus the Seymour slash wall, which was constructed in less than 4 months. And they used two skidders and two hot saws to complete the wall. So there was no risk of sagging. The wall was completed within that, probably a 2 month span of the operation, and we were able to sign off on it. Our wall was also 10 feet by 21 wide. So depending on the contractor, you do have to make sure that they understand the parameters of the wall building. You do want to make sure they have proper equipment, and if they don't, that's your discretion as to whether or not you're cool with them spending a year or you know 2 months to construct it. It could differ drastically.
Thank you, Joshua. So it's about 12:47, 12:48 right now. And so that we can finish the core conversation before some of you may need to log off at 1 o'clock, we will stay on for as long as it seems like the majority want to stay on to do Q&A. But what I'd like to do at this point is kind of wrap our final two questions into one. And if each of you can take up 2 or 3 minutes to talk about both your observations to date as well as what advice, what would you do different again next time, tips, pro tips, what would you recommend to somebody else that is interested in building a slash wall based on both what you're seeing currently and what you've learned from your experiences so far. So Ken, we'll start with you.
Great. Yeah, so observations since the wall was built. I mean, initially spent a lot of time out there. The first time we got snow after it was built, I was out there looking for tracks, just trying to make sure there weren't deer inside of the wall. And, it's worked out as advertised. It's been effective. It was cost effective. We've had almost no maintenance, basically no maintenance on the wall at all. It still is holding up well. You can see in this photo, it has settled pretty visibly. It's a pretty beefy wall, and you can see a lot of the wood in there is round wood. But the photo on the left is from right after it was completed in 2021, and the photo on the right is just week ago or so, and it's visibly settled at the gate by at least 2 or 3 feet. Still holding up really well though. For the first few years post construction, I was out there with Jeff remeasuring vegetation plots and you know early results from his study. You could see that there were definitely taller regeneration, more sprouts, inside of the wall. Um, but now, just 4.5 growing seasons later, it's you go out there, it's striking outside of the wall. We have decent regeneration. We have decent diversity. It's in Ware River watershed, so when we put a lot of sunlight on the ground out there, we typically get decent regeneration. But then you go inside the wall, and it's like twice. It seems twice as tall, twice as thick. You see preferred species that shrubs and all sorts of things that you don't see outside of the wall. It's a great place to go out and take people out and illustrate kind of the impacts that deer have and some that we don't see. I should have mentioned we have a healthy population of moose too. That's a unique thing about our site. People don't realize, but Massachusetts, Central Mass has uh, moose numbers that rival northern Maine. In Massachusetts, it's illegal to hunt a moose. So we have really no way to control the moose population. Um, we had cameras up inside and outside after we built it, and saw plenty of moose and deer outside, and plenty of birds and small mammals inside, but no moose and deer. So it's been great. Did see a bear print inside of the wall in some gravel, so other animals are able to get inside. And haven't found a bear den in it yet, but probably will someday. Definitely lessons learned. We didn't require a forwarder when we built this. Luckily, we got a crew that had them. That would be, I think it's been mentioned a couple times, but having something that can lift material onto the wall, I think, is really key. Um, a couple things that we would have done differently. Obviously, our shape of the wall didn't maximize kind of perimeter to area inside the wall. So try to find a place where there's not so many limitations on the shape. Um, Probably would have grouped our retention a little bit more. That's comments from the wildlife folks who have looked at it. Instead of having that scattered retention, do more group retention. One thing the loggers didn't like when we did the showing was I listed all the, we marked and tallied all the trees to be cut, and I included all the volume on the prospectus. But then I told them how much volume was going to have to go into the wall, so they felt like then I was stealing volume from them, even though we took $20,000 off of the minimum bid. And their biggest concern was that there would be enough volume and ended up or enough material to build the wall. With the extra 14-acre clear cut next door, there was plenty of volume or plenty of material to build the wall. That was never an issue. But just realizing that we may not have been able to get this done if we didn't add in some extra unwalled harvest around, at least at this scale. And like I said, this doesn't really fit our typical silviculture. We're more kind of half acre to 2 to 5 acre openings. So we're really curious to see if we can build these on a smaller scale to do a 5 acre opening and build that wall. I think that's where we're headed next with these, is to try to shrink it down a little bit to fit what we typically are doing.
Thank you, Ken. Tim, observations and tips.
Sure, thanks, Brett. Observations on our 2023 walls, which this photo is taken from inside one of them this spring before leaf out. Very hard to see. It's not a really good photo in terms of light, but the ribbons are on black cherry trees, some of the seedlings mostly. Might be a few stump sprouts there, but they look like mostly seedlings. The other seedlings you can see is pin cherry or fire cherry, but we're getting really good regeneration of desirables inside of both those walls. We have not seen any breaching to this point that we know of by deer. The first growing season wasn't even didn't even have to worry about it because there was much better food source of tops outside of the slash walls because there was harvesting done on the outside of the slash walls as well. So we did see more probing around the very perimeter, outside perimeter, the second winter. We saw deer probing that area a little bit more, and they were browsing on regen that did come up outside the wall. They were browsing that quite heavily the second winter. Um, so everything is looking good on those walls so far. We're also seeing, and this is really some untapped research with slash walls, I think. I think we're going to see in the future folks looking into it is the wildlife aspect in terms of benefits to wildlife of the slash walls. We're seeing very high usage of songbirds inside and around on the slash wall itself. Seeing them being very attractive to small mammals, which in turn is being making them attractive to predators. Foxes, coyotes, bobcats are patrolling the outside perimeters and, up over the wall and inside too. They can kind of go where they want. And we're also noticing that black bears are utilizing the walls as well for denning sites. And so that's kind of encouraging. The new wall, the Otter Run Fishing Game Club wall, is brand new, so there's not many observations since it was built. But one that we did observe was due to the equipment that we used there, the excavator, and the fact that it was a small wall, 5 acres, the whole area, the entire area was almost completely scarified inside. It was a very good acorn crop this year, or a fairly good one. So the club members decided in one of their work days just a few weeks ago that they would actually do some enrichment planting of acorns inside there. So they were able to plant several thousand acorns. They also introduced a couple American chestnut seedlings that they had, and uh, they're doing quite well with it. In terms of learnings, we did something different we've done 3 walls now. If you don't count the DCNR wall, we've done 3 walls that we were in complete control of, and we did something different on all 3 of them in terms of design, equipment, construction. So we're just trying to take our learnings from each one and apply it to the next one. I like winter construction if possible because with the leaves off, the contractor and the forester can tell a lot better about the integrity of the wall in terms of construction. With the leaves on, it's my opinion that a wall can look pretty bulletproof. And then when the leaves fall off, there's a potential that you have areas that might have needed reinforcement that nobody could tell when the wall was constructed, neither the operator or the forester. So if at all possible, I would try to plan construction in the winter, or at least when the leaves are off. That's not going to be possible all the time, however. The biggest thing I would say the takeaway is to recognize and try to evaluate the economic impact of deviating from the best, what I'm going to call the current best practices or guidelines in terms of building a slash wall. The fact that if you leave residuals and how many residuals you leave within the wall supply zone, what impact do you think that's going to have on cost? And you can back into that by how much more time you may think it may take the operator to do the construction. If you leave acute angles, or if you have to leave an acute angle, how long is it going to take to construct that versus if you have a radius? Because it will have an impact. If you're going on a side slope or steep terrain, that's going to have an impact on how many feet they can do per day, which is going to impact cost. The geometric shape, which is going to impact your cost per acre, whether it's ideal or whether it's not ideal. Whether or not you can use material outside of the wall. If at all possible, make your design so if it's not a real timber harvest outside of the wall, can they at least use material that they can reach with the machine? That's a pretty big thing, I think, is to be able to use some amount of material from the outside. And then the last thing would be merchandising. Um, I think, Dan, you mentioned this as an issue or a potential issue about merchandising with the contractors. This can be this can be real critical because if you merchandise a lot of low-grade material from the wall supply zone and you end up going farther to get the material for construction, the cost adds up in a hurry. So I think the biggest challenge we have in our area is developing contractors that are willing to try this practice because it's something new and we have to make it attractive to them financially and still attractive to the landowner and us as forest managers. We do have a lot of contractors with the equipment in our area. The challenge is just getting multiple contractors, not just one or two, but getting multiple contractors interested in doing these projects.
Thank you, Tim. Dan, I couldn't
Yes.
help but throw this
Oh,
photo in here
yeah.
for your observations.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing, and the picture says a lot to me, anyways. It's not of me, it's of I'm the scale. So that's about 75 inches to the top of the hat. And that's two growing seasons with a closed wall that is of note. It's a stump sprout. Um, but we do have black cherry seedlings in there, and I would say they're approaching 5 to 6 feet tall. And then we have sugar maple, abundant. The cut coincided with a heavy mass year in 2022 for us out here anyways, and it's just amazing. It's tremendous what's happening inside the wall. Something that we've been doing is a transect line in the spring. We'll just walk through and make observations of basically specifically spring ephemerals, and but you're seeing things that we just haven't seen in abundance, and it's 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 something to see. Having the slash wall kind of forces one to spend more time there in observation, and so we're able to see things that we just are not used to. It was mentioned by someone, maybe everyone. There's cameras inside this wall as well as outside, and I should clarify that one camera inside, one camera outside, and they stay stationary, and we just pull the cards every once in a while, and we're aside from though the transect wall or line, I should say, we're also working with Audubon to they had some pre-harvest in collection of audio listening to birds, and then also we have one outside the wall. And so we have that information to compare. So the data is good, helpful, useful um, to work with the public to communicate what we're doing and show success. There's I think someone mentioned about wildlife. So um, when we talk about the wall itself, if we think about just brush piles back in the day were a wildlife technique. So the wall is a gigantic slash wall, or brush pile, I should say. Sorry. So we see a lot of birds flushing in and out. We see mammals of all kinds. I had a video that was a little too grainy of two bear running toward and then up over the wall. And and then inside the wall, one neat observation. We're again basically seeing everything inside, with the exception of deer, right? Um, that we see outside. And one example is like turkeys, seeing hen turkeys in there nesting, and then they'll just if you flush, they cruise outside the wall, or they have a lot of protection there. Thinking about um, some recommendations, I heard a few times people mention about terrain. There is plenty of terrain on the Bush Hills site, and we were not 100% sure if we might have come up with a new Olympic sport of downhill excavator sled run. And so you definitely have to think about that. And to witness it as something. There was no accidents or anything, but we literally on two portions built terraces almost, and in effect, it also functioned as water bars. But again, you think about that, but in this case, we had the terrain. We wanted to go where we wanted to go, but thinking about this in a contractual way, my recommendation one would be consider uh, allowing where it's appropriate or necessary some wiggle room in the contractual language that allows you to deviate a little bit here or there, and all within the verbiage that you've laid out and everyone has bid on, but it might not be hard and fast that you have to be within, 5 feet, 10 feet, 20 feet of the line that you've laid out for the perimeter, but maybe a 20-foot plus or minus, or some wiggle room that you could put in the contract to help. And then lastly, a point to be thinking about, depending on the size of the wall, is when you get ready to close out the wall, have you made all of the proper considerations for making sure there's no deer inside? And so that's something that it's been talked about in most of the Cornell stuff. And when you're doing it on your own, though, and you're thinking about it, it's so we did that contractually. We put in there that we require some type of a deer drive, but we also had communicated with our Fish and Wildlife to what would happen if we have them in there. It's not a hunting season. What can we do? And so we had that stuff laid out ahead of time, and just we want to keep the deer out, not in. So there was just a few points from us, and again, the basswood, a preferred deer browse, and I don't, as a rule of thumb, I don't cut basswood unless it's in a skid trail or road or a landing or something like that. But if you're inside a slash well, look at what you can do. Obviously, that tree went into the wall, and that was representative basically of any basswood stump that we had cut between March and say May. You had that kind of regeneration in two growing seasons.
Thank you, Dan. And finally, Joshua.
I'll just do so one one thing I wish we'd have done differently. Not only do you have to worry about the deer jumping over the wall, but you have to worry about the deer crawling under the wall. Depending on where the wall is constructed and how dense the wood is, it could sag in such a way that creates a hole, and the deer will army crawl under the wall. One of our walls did have deer that were able to get into it that we had to have hunted away. So maybe within the first month or two, I would spend a little bit more time walking the entire exterior of the wall looking for spots where deer could crawl under. And then one other thing that for the future is that in Connecticut, at least, um, right now I'm planning another slash wall, and when we submitted to our natural diversity database, they came back with recommendations that we needed to work with a herpetologist to discuss how we would allow egress for turtles to enter and exit the wall. We have some pretty good ideas. I think it'll be pretty easy to contend with, but I haven't gotten the recommendations from the herpetologist yet, and I'm sure there's going to be more studies on that. But um, just keep in mind that there's going to be questions coming down the pike on various animals and who can enter and who can exit, and how do we um, create this wall so that it's beneficial to everybody involved. So just keep those in mind as you're beginning to plan your next slash wall.
Thank you, Joshua. So we're a little bit over the hour. We're uncertain if all four of our presenters can stick around, but I think most or all can. If you need to step away for a minute to grab a drink, feel free to. But at this point, I'm going to an excellent job, especially considering that this was totally unrehearsed today. I think we got through a big chunk of everything that we were hoping to share, but it looks like there have been a number of questions and comments piling up. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeff and Peter to try to synthesize and field some of those questions that we can open it up as a group discussion at this point. And we'll probably try to cover what we can cover here for roughly the next 20, 30 minutes, and then we'll see how the energy levels of everybody's holding up, and maybe hold off on some of that until this evening. So, Peter, if you're
Great.
listening
Yes,
in,
I am for sure. This was a fabulous presentation. I just like my applause to the foresters that put thought into preparing for this. I learned a lot. Many of you have already spoken to or have been involved with your slash walls, and so it's really great to see them like all packaged together in a 1 hour block. So thank you for that. So the questions, so some of the questions were dealing with things like so the sourcing of the wood was one of the first questions. Was all the wood sourced from the inside, or how much of it came from the outside? So is there, in our experience, at least at the Arnott Forest, is most of it comes from inside the slash walls. Um, I know Ken, your project there on the Quabbin and with Jeff, they've used, I'm guessing, forwarders to move a lot of that wood from the control area without the slash wall into the slash wall. But what are some of the others? Um, what are you seeing your loggers do? Anybody getting wood from the outside? Tim, you mentioned, I think it was valuable to have that. Are they actually doing it or just
Yes, primarily just what a machine can reach, either excavator or the feller buncher. And mainly the value I see in that is when you're all finished, or if the forester comes out and finds a spot, or the contractor themselves, they find a spot that they need to top off towards the end when you're nearing completion. And you've used everything probably that's close on the inside. If you just need something to top off a spot, an area that you need to reinforce a little bit because it was a little low or maybe not quite dense enough, it's real valuable to have that option to just grab some stuff really close from the outside perimeter.
okay? Any of you others have any additions to that?
Yeah, I
Um,
think you probably want to be pretty careful about how much you're taking from the outside since that's going to be unprotected. So you don't want to, in our case, we have, about 20 acres outside of our walls that are clear cut, and those are areas that are unprotected and are, basically the deer can run rampant and do what they want. I think for our future harvests, we will probably utilize some wood from outside the wall, but to Tim's point, you want it to be sparingly, as the deer are going to be there for the foreseeable future. So, maybe not clear cut outside the wall, but with some restraint, take what you can.
I was just going to mention on ours, the majority of the material came from inside. We didn't really prescribe how they were going to build it. We just kind of let them build it. They did it pretty efficiently. They would carry some brush that was close to the landing with them on the forwarder when they were going to pick up logs kind of inside the wall and drop the brush off, either put it on the wall or just kind of stage it. So they did it as efficiently as they could. And when you walk the outside of the wall near the landing and probably maybe halfway down that clear cut, there's less slash, but there still is material there. They didn't try to grab it all, so it worked out pretty well.
Okay. Another question that both Jeff and I had responded to, but I'd like to get your reactions, is the concern about increased soil compaction in what we think of as that wall supply zone. So if you've got a piece of equipment, an excavator or feller buncher going back and forth, so there's more equipment activity. Do you sense that there's a higher level of compaction? And do you notice visible differences in the vegetative response, let's say within the wall supply zone versus more interior portions of the harvest?
and would it be a concern of yours, that higher level of impact?
I would say that it would be a concern. Uh, it was something that I was concerned about and still may be in the future. But to this point, on the two walls that we did in 2023, I don't see that there was any negative impact with that. It seems intuitive that there's a potential for negative impact, but we're not seeing it yet, anyways.
Timing might be very key in that situation too. I think Tim mentioned winter work for the wall. The one in New York here was also winter, but we had a timber sale that had just been cleaned up, and then comparing the timber sale cleanup with the slash wall was much less invasive, if you will, in terms of on soil compaction and that.
Okay.
I haven't noticed any difference on ours. Ours was built in the summer, but it was pretty dry site, dry conditions, and they built it. A lot of the way that they built the base of it, anyways, was just the normal course of what they were doing, anyways. So there wasn't a lot of extra traversing going on. I would say, ours was around a 14-acre clear cut, and I went back and GPS inside of the wall just out of curiosity, and it was 13 acres. So we lost an acre just in wall. So there are some trade-offs.
When we calculated, and this wasn't with GPS, it was just assuming a 20-foot wall, and we had one or the other measurement. It works out to be about an 8 to 10% loss on moderate size. You get much bigger, it's not going to be maybe as big, but there is a footprint, a very real measurable footprint to the slash wall. So Aaron's wanting to know, and this is a common question. So from you all, and you span, pretty big geographic east-west difference. What about fire? Are you worried about fire and do you see the slash wall as a concentration of fuel that you need to be concerned about?
I find that the wall, due to its density, tends to stay more moist than the surrounding area for longer periods of time. Now, if you have a multi-month drought, that would change, but the fact of the matter is you're kind of taking all of the residual slash and kind of compiling it into the centralized area, meaning if there was a fire, the likelihood of that fire spreading much further out from the wall, it kind of be uh, situated along that wall. So, though it could probably create quite a sizable blaze, there would have to be other factors kind of playing into it, wind and dryness that would have to perpetuate it. And if that were the case, it probably wouldn't be any more dangerous than if the slash was left behind on the whole entire site. Anecdotally, I don't have any scientific research on that or anything, but that's my thought process.
We had some internal concerns about it, and Service Forestry, the regulators had a concern. They didn't want us to have the wall directly up against any residual stems to create kind of a ladder fuel situation. And we addressed the internal ones by building a big gate that you could fit a fire truck, uh, through in the case of a fire. They could get in and do what they needed to do if they needed to get in there. My biggest concern with it was if we had like a massive drought right after we built the thing when you still had all the fine fuel material in the wall, that could be an issue. But yeah, right now, even with the drought we're in, I don't think if you tried to light it on fire, it would catch.
Okay. Just to add to that conversation, one of the participants responded to the question, said, and this was speculative, he wants my thoughts, and I don't know. That's why I was happy you all commented on it. But since the slash wall uses woody debris close to the wall, the fuel load would be reduced close to the wall, perhaps, and thus in some fashion serve as a bit of a fire break. So we need a good pyrologist to do some work on these. So I think that's all well, there's one other question that was getting at like gauging how much wood you need. So this, what Brett and I refer to as the wall supply zone. And Ken, I know you had done calculations based on some of our initial calculations on how much wood was necessary, which we've since had a graduate student has revised those. Are actually the amount of wood is much smaller than what we had anticipated. But how did Dan and Joshua and Tim, how did you all go about advising your loggers? If they said, the obvious question is there enough wood to build a slash wall? I like to think of it as how much wood can a woodchuck chuck, but like how do you give yourself and whoever's doing the work confidence to move forward?
I know in our experience, it seemed like, just anecdotally having a because we did the clear cut on the outside and on the inside, and maybe with Ken as well, having the clear cut adjacent to the walled in area, you basically have that whole reservoir of trees to use for your wall. I think building the confidence for someone to have enough wood gets a little more tricky when you say you need to build the wall and your constraints are the forest line that you can't touch anything outside the wall. You can only use everything internally.
Mhm.
I know for our contractors, to Ken's point, we had some issues where they felt like they were losing some of their low grade material that they would use for firewood or for tie logs, things like that. We kind of had to say, look, you got to factor in you're losing that, bid accordingly. And once the wall's complete, then the rest of it's fair game. But once, we have to approve the entirety of the wall first before you can remove any more of that low grade material for your own use. And we did have a significant amount of low grade material left behind on those sites. But again, we had almost 20 acres exterior to the wall that they could pull from to build the wall. So will it be a little more tricky in the future? Maybe, but it sure seems like within 100 feet of the wall on either side, there's plenty of material to construct these walls.
Okay.
I did some calculations on the second wall we did and measured about 135 square feet of basal area in the wall supply zone. Used a 10 factor prism. And I think it's important to stay within that 100 or 150 feet. Again, because distance really starts increasing cost in a hurry. Um, so, I mean, I'm feeling real comfortable at 130 to 150 square feet of basal area. And that was a combination of culls. That was everything. So that was a combination of culls, pulpwood, and saw timber together. But if you can get, say, 30, 30 feet on the outside of the wall that you can add some basal area in. I know you're not probably going to cut everything, but let's say you want a 10-foot path out on the outside. That gives you 10 foot, and then you have 20 feet that you can reach with the machine that you're getting, maybe you're getting 30, 40 square feet of basal area from the outside at a minimum, and you can add that with the inside to try to stay within that 100, 150 feet on the inside. Um, but I think that is key is trying to determine the amount of material you have. And it's a little bit, the first time you do it, you're a little unsure. Is it, do I
Mhm.
have enough? Don't I have enough? If I don't have enough, what's the contractor going to say? If it, and we did it on our own property the first time, which gave us a lot of flexibility to do things that you may not have if you were doing it consulting for a private landowner.
Mhm. All right. Then the final question, Alex Amendola's from Connecticut, who I met with. We did a SAF field tour a couple of years ago that Jeff and others sponsored. They're having issues with concerns about box turtles and the potential need to have safe passage under or through the slash wall for box turtles. So there were, I did see at least one wildlife biologist that was on here earlier. I don't know if she's still on, but if there are other wildlife biologists can chime in to the chat, or it's like, is this so? Do you think this is an issue? And what Alex is suggesting, what Brett and I had some email conversations with some foresters in Connecticut about just putting a couple of logs, large poles or small saws, perpendicular to the slash wall. We thought of it as not an aqueduct, it's a turtle duct, but it's a way for the turtles could go back and forth, and you could put those at some interval. It seems like that's an option. So maybe that specifically about box turtles, or are there other things that you would recommend to make the walls more inviting, accessible, less problematic for wildlife or for other parts of the environment?
Yeah, I think doing those perpendicular logs make a lot of sense. The real question will be, how many make sense? Per how many feet do you need? And, maybe a herpetologist would be able to answer that, understanding the movements of turtles and what their home range is. Um, you know, in my experience with our walls and maybe with others, the walls are so inconsistent with what size material is at the base and how it degrades and what's left behind in terms of pathways. And, we find turtles in very strange places. They tend to go where they want to go, and sometimes it doesn't make much sense. I would presume that they're probably getting in and out of the walls just fine, but adding egress like this will definitely promote their movement within and outside the wall, as well as, maybe things like snakes, maybe other small mammals be able to enter and exit the wall easier. I mean, the wall in and of itself is an environment. It's an area for rabbits and turkeys and other, animals to utilize as protection. So, creating that egress is only going to promote its usage.
Any other thoughts on box turtles or other wildlife? All right. Well, you all have done a great job. You've stuck around for 90 minutes, and we appreciate that. And we still have more than half of the audience still at 90 minutes. So you all get a great big round of applause and some great questions and thoughts coming out of the audience and from you all. So, and there's if you can see the chat window, lots of comments popping up about how much people have appreciated your insights. So with that, I'm going to close the noon hour session, and we'll look to have you all back this evening at about 6:45, and we'll do it all over again. So
Great. Thank you.
thanks. Thank you very much. Great job. I can't say it enough. Great job. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Everyone
guys.
soon.